evening. It's my pleasure to introduce Sayvon JL Foster, an assistant professor of sport management at the University of Kansas. By trade, Sayvon is a sports sociologist who specializes in college athletics with emphasis on HBCU athletics, college sport culture, and college athlete experience and development. Within his research in classrooms, Sayvon takes on a practical and liberatory stance that centers accessibility, understanding, and justice. He is the founder of the Sport Experience at Special Mission Institutions, or SESME, Research Lab. The mission of SESME is to center sport at special mission institutions through rigorous and accessible scholarship, amplify sport at special mission institutions and their communities through collaboration, and celebrate the contributions of these spaces through public scholarship and service. Outside of his teaching and research, Sayvon plays an active role in his respective communities and committees by serving as a first-year student mentor, Social Justice and Campus Climate Committee member, SOEHS Scholarship Committee member, and Youth Mentor. Sayvon has published his scholarship in journals such as the Sociology of Sport Journal, Journal of Issues in Intercollegiate Athletics, Innovative Higher Education, and the Journal of Athlete Development and Experience. He has also presented research at multiple national and international conferences, notably at the North American Society for Sport Management, the College Sport Research Institute, and the North American Society for the Sociology of Sport. Please join me in welcoming Sayvon JL Foster for his lecture, How College Athletics Build Culture and Community. Thanks so much.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Oh, man. First and foremost, thank you all. This has been a wonderful trip thus far. So I specifically want to call out Josh. Thank you for the random email, LinkedIn message, and everything else that's developed from that. Everyone else on UNE's campus, thank you for the warm welcome. This has been a wonderful experience. And this is my first time coming to Maine. So this is definitely added to the list of like vacation destinations. So you will see me in a more or less formal space. So I look forward to being there and being able to experience this space with you all in a different area. So this lecture is pretty chill. I don't want it to be too academic, too schooly. This is just more so kind of looking at my research, but also looking at college sport in a different way. I think a lot of times when we look at sport, we just look at it from this very commercial space, like how much money can be generated, or we look at it from just a very narrow scope of like, I'm in it, I do it. But there's so much more. So there's 4 things that I want to do. The first one is I want to bridge the gap between sports identity and the university identity. I do not believe that college athletics and the university need to operate separately from each other. And in this lecture, you'll see how they actually come together in many different ways. The second one is to emphasize the power of culture and cultural reproduction. So how the role of society and how the role of social expectations impact these spaces. I want to illuminate the impact of sport at special mission institutions. As someone who graduated from a special mission institution and who's been an admissions counselor and worked in these many different capacities, this is incredibly important. And then finally, I want to reinforce the role of the athletics department in creating and contributing to this culture and to this process. So I've used the phrase cultural reproduction a couple times thus far, and some of you all may be wondering, what is cultural reproduction and what does this do? So to keep it as simple as possible, just so we can see this in our regular day-to-day, cultural reproduction starts with society. They have their own set of norms, values, and expectations that are then put into different institutions. So right now we can look at University of New England as the institution that is now embodying or amplifying the thoughts, values, and purposes of what the broader scope of society wants. So then after the university either amplifies, it says, no, we're not going to do these things, or it affirms some of these norms and values, it is then put into their students. So after the students have their own set of norms, values, and expectations that have been reiterated through the institution, it then goes back, because now students go back into society. So it's a cyclical process to where whatever society deems to be important or valuable. Institutions typically have language, they have traditions, they have expectations, they have normative operations that are then reiterating those things, and that becomes part of the ethos when it comes to the students. I noticed this here. UNE has historically taken a very active role when it comes to environmentalism and health. And I see this very evident throughout the campus in terms of like this being easily one of the cleanest campuses I've ever been on, but then also looking at the academic programs, looking at the student clubs and organizations and how they've kind of reiterated those things. But this also happens in other spaces outside of education. We can say the same thing with sports. Who in here is an athlete, current athlete? Who in here is a former athlete? Who in here just watches sports in general? All right, perfect. So the wonderful thing about sports is that it does the same thing. Whether it's the actual sport itself or the organization, it will reiterate certain norms, values, thoughts, and expectations that become very normal and synonymous with us. So as someone, I'm from the Rust Belt region of the United States, so I'm from Ohio. So that Detroit, Chicago, Northern Ohio, all the way up to Buffalo, there's a very specific culture that is synonymous with that space, and it's typically a very community-based, hard-working, blue-collar type of identity. And as someone who is a very diehard Steelers fan, that's the same type of logic that's typically infused within the language and the identity of the team. So you have a professional team who not only built their mascot and their team name around an industry and around an identity of that particular area. When you're being a fan and you're operating and moving through that space, there are certain values and expectations that you communicate and have within that particular space. So if we see this through higher education and we see this through sports, why not blend it together and see this happen within college sport, which is typically what we do. Many universities, many college athletic programs, they embody certain languages, they embody certain imagery, they embody a lot of these components that will outline and provide an explanation into how they want these individuals to interact or these individuals to operate. So when we're looking at the role of higher education and we're looking at the role of college sport, we have to understand that colleges and universities have always served as components of the broader scope of society. Not only do they provide a service to the community, but they also reflect the community and they make sure that what the community values is being reiterated in that particular space. So here's a couple images from different universities, different spaces all over the country, and these are all very unique institutions that do a great job of reflecting their community. So I have Southern University, which is an HBCU in Louisiana, and they do a great job of really honing in on what it means to be someone from Louisiana, what it means to be someone from Baton Rouge, and they also integrate a lot of those essential components within their athletic experience or their athletic space. Texas A&M is actually the largest senior military campus across the nation. And even though they are a public institution, they still have a very clear-cut connection to the military, which is evident in a lot of their operations and a lot of their spaces. And then you have religious institutions where they do have religious leaders and religious elements within these particular spaces. But this blends over and it impacts the fan experience, whether it is prayer at games, whether it's prayer at certain components, or it's the names of stadiums. It could be different traditions or what's deemed to be normal or expected. So one of the traditions at Texas A&M, which has a direct parallel to their military history, is that at every football game, you stand the entire game. You stand at attention at every football game. And no matter who you are, I've seen little kids visiting with family, and I've seen elderly ags who graduated in the 40s, 50s, and 60s standing at attention the entire game because that draws a parallel to the military history and identity that is key to what Texas A&M is and how Texas A&M operates. From an athlete perspective, the way that athletic institutions integrate institutional identity. So again, looking at the language used by coaches, the language and programs iterated within their athletics department, that plays a key role in drawing that connection between the institution and the broader scope of athletics. And does a great job of also building that connection from the athlete to the university, which is why we do have athletes that 10, 15, 20 years removed from their academic and athletic institutions, they still come back, they serve, and they have that connection. And that's where you see those parallels between those spaces. So one of the beautiful things I've seen within my early research is the role of special mission institutions and the active role that they've played in really building and bridging that connection. So special mission institutions are higher education institutions that serve an underlying community or they have a very specific and unique operation or orientation. So this could be a military campus. So we have obviously our service academies. We have the maritime academies, but we also have some colleges and universities that historically they've had a connection to the military. And that connection to the military has been infused into a lot of their operations and a lot of their traditions. You have tribal colleges and universities. I have the luxury of being less than 20 minutes away from one of the most notable tribal colleges and universities in U.S. history, Haskell Indian Nations University. And the role that they've played in their athletic history, the role that they've played in social justice has been incredibly important. You have religious-based institutions. So this could be any religious identity, but these institutions have a religious undergirding that shapes the way that they operate, that shapes the way that they interact, that shapes the way that they teach and communicate lessons not only to their athletes, but to the practitioners that work in those spaces, as well as the fans that enjoy those spaces. We have Hispanic serving institutions. So these are relatively new institutions, but historically they've served Hispanic and Latino communities. And again, all of these institutions take on very unique approaches. So again, as someone who graduated from an HBCU, which is a historically black college or university, the way that our athletic space is designed and operated is HBCUs have a certain level of pageantry and community involvement. So when we have our games and our events, one of the things that's essential is creating a certain level of accessibility, not just for the students, but for those within the community. So earlier I got to talk about my alma mater. My alma mater, Winston-Salem State, has been known for being one of the highest markers of social mobility for our graduates. So students who graduate from Winston tend to put themselves in better academic, social, and economic spaces following their graduation. But one of the things that our athletics department that they've done continuously is that they've made sure to create pathways for students and their families to come to our games for a relatively accessible price. At some points, we've even provided free access to some of our sporting events for specific schools, and we tend to rotate that. That's a key component in bridging that gap and living up to that model of creating a pathway for social mobility. I also want to highlight, even though they're one of our competitors in the Big 12 Conference, I have to give some kudos to BYU. They don't do the typical tailgate. They actually do a service tailgate. So while they do have regular tailgates, they always try to find different ways to serve and give back to the surrounding communities, even when they're at away games. Now, I haven't been to every tailgate in the country, but I'm pretty sure that's not the norm, to where community service is an essential component of your tailgate experience. But for BYU to find a way to integrate that into their athletic space is incredible. And the fact that they tap into their alumni network, they encourage their students, and it becomes something that other individuals are looking forward to. We have to give the kudos to BYU. Like I talked about, I graduated from Texas A&M for my PhD, and one of the things I was really excited to learn and very happy that I learned was the role of our military identity in shaping a lot of our traditions. So at A&M, we don't have the typical cheerleaders. We have what we call yell leaders, which historically has always been an all-male military-affiliated group. Typically, all of the members were parts of our Corps of Cadets, but they would actually put together our chants. So this picture over in the corner, this picture over here in the corner is from the early days of looking at our yell leaders. And the interesting thing is that the uniforms are exactly the same and the traditions are exactly the same. So we all meet at midnight. Historically, that was a time where all military cadets at the university could all meet together because you don't have any responsibilities at midnight. But they would meet and they would learn different chants, different things of that nature, and find ways to be able to integrate that into the game. So again, these very small components of our military identity have been reflected into the larger operation of our athletic spaces. Many Hispanic-serving colleges and universities have integrated bilingual language use within their athletic spaces. They've made translations on their jerseys, so they do have Spanish-based jerseys. They also find ways to integrate the local community. So whether that's bringing in local restaurants to serve concessions or even having local food trucks or things of that nature, big and small, they found ways to integrate these things. And with many universities now transitioning or being able to adopt that Hispanic serving institution classifier, they've now been incredibly intentional in their overall programming. I believe it was maybe a year or two ago, University of Arizona and UTEP played a game together, and they actually scheduled that game during Hispanic Heritage Month, and they included a lot of imagery, a lot of music, and a lot of other additional components to ensure that not only are these two institutions living up to being Hispanic-serving institutions, but they're doing it in a space to where it's even amplified a little bit further within the athletic identity. And a lot of that is due to, if you look at it just from an academic space, you may not know these certain components of your university. You may not know the history, the legacy, the heritage that comes along with these spaces. And it's very hard to integrate that into a marketing class, into, an English class. It's very hard to integrate those components, but it's very easy to educate the masses, not only through commercials and things of that nature, but educate those in attendance at a game. You can learn a chant, you can learn certain things, you can highlight and celebrate individuals at these particular spaces during games, and it almost seems normal. It's very easy to get a stadium of 2,000 to 3,000 people to cheer when someone gets a recognition or to cheer when something's going on because we're already in that space. But if you try to get a classroom to cheer for someone, that's a little more difficult. So again, it's a very unique space overall. And I want to make sure that I also highlight Baylor. One of the things that Baylor's been pretty consistent with is, before games and after games, no matter the outcome, they finish in a prayer. Baylor, as many of you all know, is a Baptist institution, and they're a Baptist institution in Texas, and I feel like that plays a very important role. As someone that was a Texan for 4 years, a volunteer Texan for 4 years, the religious identity and religious component at Baylor is incredibly important, and the fact that they found ways to integrate that into the game and it didn't matter about the outcome, again, speaks to a lot of the religious imagery and a lot of the religious lessons that we've been taught, that you don't focus on the outcome, you focus on the path, journey, and the overall experience. So this was after they won the national championship, but if you were to go back and look at previous games, the prayer circles continued no matter the outcome of the games. So I do want to take this time to also highlight some of the work that I'm doing. This is definitely in the early stages, but this is also in some very important stages. So the first one is I'm looking at the Crossroads League, which is the only NAIA or NCAA sponsored conference that has a religious undergirding. All members are part of religious institutions. There are currently, I believe, 11 member institutions, and there are 10 different denominations of Christianity represented within this conference. So each of these schools, they're all centrally located: Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. So they're all located within the same region. So there's some underlying cultural norms that are the same. But right now, I'm looking to see how this religious identity impacts the way that they operate. Who do they market with? How do they market? What things do they allow or not allow within their athletic spaces? How does this impact coaching? How do coaches teach and lead in these spaces? Because that religious undergirding is important. The way that you teach, the way that you work with your communities, it wouldn't make sense if you had a coach that was very hostile and aggressive and used foul language and you're at a religious institution. It kind of doesn't match up the same way that if you were a institution that emphasized the role in the community, but you didn't find ways to make your sporting space and other elements of your university accessible. So I'm also doing a project with tribal colleges and universities across the country, looking at their indigenous identity and the role that that plays within the broader scope of their athletics operations, from executive leadership all the way down to academic advising and everywhere in between. These institutions have a very unique history. They have a unique tradition that's grounded in their identity, and it would be irresponsible for us to assume that they all operate in the same fashion. So my hope is that for these two projects, being that they're the newer projects, is that we add a much needed level of nuance and insight into these spaces. So for those that want to be fans, they find institutions, they find universities that they can connect to based off a religious identity. Maybe you do want to cheer for a school that matches up with how you believe or how you think or how you move and navigate the world. Or if you are at a space where you're able to go and enjoy a sporting event at a tribal college or university, you're able to understand the tradition, you're able to understand the imagery, the colors used, you're able to see that there's a deeper meaning behind it, that this isn't just, oh, they just picked the logo, they just picked an event, they picked the music, and that's it. This is where I differ from many folks. I do believe that these decisions are very intentional. And as someone who attended an institution where every decision we made was incredibly intentional, as someone who's worked with institutions, and I saw that everything that they did was incredibly intentional, I want to make sure that I'm celebrating and highlighting their intentionality. And then the final one, I want to continue my work when it comes to HBCUs. So I've been able to start many projects and been able to get those over the finish line. One of the things that I'm actually working on now is that the HBCU Athletic Conference is actually the first athletic conference, they're in the NAIA, to have HBCU be a part of their identity. So there are other HBCU conferences. You have the CIAA, which is the Central Intercollegiate Athletic Association. You have the MEAC, which is the Mid-Eastern, and then you have the SWAC, which is the Southwestern. So you have these conferences, and they essentially focus on regionality. This is the first athletic conference to do a complete rebrand and make being HBCU affiliated a central part of their identity. And I think that's incredibly important. The same way that the Crossroads revamped their identity and changed the way that they position themselves, and you see the meaning within their design. The HBCU AC did the same thing, and actually next week I get to present some of that research at another conference in Chicago. And I think that's also incredibly important given Chicago's HBCU lineage and HBCU history. So I've already connected with some folks out there, and I want them to be able to see that space and be able to celebrate it. But that's only step one in the many projects. I want to continue building upon this, and hopefully I can narrow down and look at marketing, look at sponsorship, look at academic advising, look at wellness and all these other components and how they're kind of communicated and explained within that specific space with relation to the institutional identity. Because again, I do believe it's important. And many special mission institutions are becoming defined and becoming understood year after year. So just through my research, we have urban serving universities. So these are universities that are in large metropolitan areas that serve communities that you have to deal with being in a large metropolitan city. There's a very set of unique challenges, and as someone who has family in a rural South, there's also rural serving universities that shape their entire identity around working with and serving individuals from more rural and sparse areas. So again, being able to understand the uniqueness of these institutions, as well as how this uniqueness is integrated into their athletic spaces, is incredibly key. And not only being conscious consumers, being able to know who you're supporting and why you're supporting them, but it also creates a pathway for you to be able to celebrate these institutions and for these unique practices to become part of the norm. It's incredibly irresponsible for me to assume that every school will operate like a University of Kansas, an Ohio State, or a Texas A&M. But then these schools that may not operate like them shouldn't be shunned, shouldn't be ridiculed. They should be celebrated for finding the unique way that they operate and position themselves. So I've done a little bit of research on UNE, and one of the things that really stuck out to me, and it was really powerful, was one, learning how UNE does work with a lot of first-generation college students. As a first-gen college student myself, it's very easy to feel like higher ed isn't your space. But when UNE was faced with the opportunity to do a rebrand and they chose to stay with being a Nor'easter, I learned why people were so happy with that identity and why people stuck close to it. And it came down to what a Nor'easter stood for, what meaning you got from it. Being strong, being powerful, and someone specifically said being a force to be reckoned with. And again, as a first-gen college student, it's very easy to feel like, oh, this isn't my space. But to be able to rally around a university identity of a very powerful storm that, again, I was not privy to what a Nor'easter was until I did some research. One, those things are kind of scary. I don't know how y'all deal with that, and it happens in the wintertime. That's not the norm for me. But being able to rally around an identity of being powerful, being a force to be reckoned with, when historically you've been counted out, Like that's heavy. And I mean, again, it's very easy to pick something else that's very synonymous with New England. But you pick the one thing that, again, you all know that not everybody can bear with, not everyone can stand through. So I got to give you all your kudos for staying strong. And also, the rebrand of the mascot's pretty dope. I've seen the old pictures and new pictures. The rebrand's pretty dope. And I think you all may be the only school that's like actually like a weather element that's a mascot. That's kind of dope as well. Like, again, I give credit where credit's due. But, you know, to wrap up, again, I like to keep this very simple, very easy for everyone to understand, but I also want to give more room for questions. I want you all to leave with a couple things. First is, I want you all to look at college sport more critically, more investigative. When you go somewhere, try to see what the deeper meaning is behind certain things. Try to see what the correlation, where the correlation lies between university identity, community identity, or maybe even if things have changed over years. Again, the traditions that are here now are not the traditions that will exist 10, 15, 20 years from now. If we go back to that cycle of cultural reproduction, the expectations of society have changed. I can look at that from my alma mater in particular. With HBCUs, music is incredibly important. Within the Black community, music is incredibly important. And what we've started with, which is traditional band culture, I encourage you all, when you leave from here, go to YouTube and just look up HBCU band. Any band's gonna work. If I have to let you know, either the Human Jukebox, that's a great band to look at, but then also the Red Sea of Sound from my alma mater. Both of those institutions both of those bands are perfect examples, but the role of music is important. But as time has progressed, my HBCU, while we still integrate the band, we were the first school in our conference to have an in-game DJ on the floor. We literally reshaped the way that our basketball games operate. We have a sectioned off area for our DJ, and we play in-game music while the game is also going on. We've been able to take snippets from certain songs and use it as a way to trash talk while we're also there. And then we have very special songs that we use to rally the crowd. But again, if you're not from there, if you're not from that space, you would just think, what the heck is going on? Am I at a basketball game or am I at a party, cookout, or the club? So again, it's a very unique space to be in, but it's really important to see how that tradition of music has transformed from, you know, you go back to the classes within the 80s, the band was the central component. But now you look at the class, I graduated in 2016, and, you know, we somehow, some way found an integrated DJ, and now that's commonplace within our entire conference. So if you go to any school within the CIAA, there's always an in-game DJ. I think we still may be the only school that has the DJ on the floor. So our bleachers actually don't open up all the way. We make sure that the DJ has a place to set up, protective glass and everything, and we hook them up to the speakers, and it's an experience. So if you also have the time, look up WSSU basketball, and you'll see how the DJ just gets the game going. But again, look at it through a critical investigative eye. I want you, again, to take note of university identity, history, traditions, all of these things that have been integrated into this space, but also see how you getting comfortable with doing it within the athletic space, the rippling effect that it has within your academic space. You know, we see the trends, you know, when athletics are up, it kind of bleeds through the university. When new sports or things like that are integrated, it bleeds through the university. Again, it is very hard to get a classroom of students to do a chant, but if I go into a stadium, it's very easy for me to get y'all to do a chant. It's very easy for me to get y'all to do the wave or whatever else it needs to be. And a lot of that goes down to, that's where we share this collective identity. We have this collective goal of we want our team to win, and then you're able to, again, spill that over. That pride goes into a lot of the other components within your academic space. I want you to become immersed within the fanfare, again, learn the history, add nuance to rules, regulations, and language. So this is more so for those that are going to be the next waves of professionals. Take note of the university history. Learn what's important. Learn what's valuable. See how things are changing and find ways to integrate those changes within those particular spaces. We don't need this, again, we respect the old guard, but the old guard is the old guard for a reason. We need to add in the new perspectives, fresh opinions. You know, if you would have told me that, now I look back at the traditions at my alma mater, and I'm not even removed for a full decade, and we have new traditions and new expectations. And those are the things that happen when individuals are being responsive to the rules and younger professionals are being brought in who want to integrate them into this space. our entire conference adjusted the rules when it came to music during gameplay because, again, they saw the role of the DJs, they saw the role of the band, they saw the role of our dance teams, and that plays a huge part. And then finally, I want you to realize that there's a bigger game at play. Yes, we go to the sporting events. Yes, they are a commercial enterprise. Money will be generated from college athletics. I'm not going to sit here and act like it's not. There's certain expectations within these spaces, but also realize that these spaces carry significant weight. There's a reason why people from the community come to the games. There's a reason why little kids who see these games now will go to school, talk to their friends, and say, hey, I want to go to UNE, or I want to go to this university or that university. It's because they're now drawing a connection to that institution outside of athletics. They're seeing that this is a space where I feel safe, I feel comfortable. I know these chants, I'm now learning the meaning behind it. But also, this is where you start to dig a little bit deeper, and you start to see, okay, now I'm getting a little bit older. I've always had this connection to this institution. Now does it match with me socially? Does it match with me academically? Does it match with me professionally? That's where you're able to, again, see these connections. What went from typical fanfare is now going into a potential major life decision on if you choose to enroll at that university. And then after you enroll at the university, do you persist and continue there? And what role does athletics play in you still becoming a part of that university culture, that campus culture? I'm gonna wrap it up. Storm on. Oh man, I like that too. Storm on, that's a nice one. But I do want to stay connected. Here's my contact information. So please feel free to take it down, take a picture. But I really hope that you all got to learn something or see something different. Or maybe you're just looking at college athletics a little differently now and you want to see a little more integrated into your athletic space, or you're able to see it in other athletic spaces. But other than that, I open the floor for questions.
Great, thank you so much, Sayvon. At this time, I have a microphone, and my colleague Neil in the back corner of the room has a microphone. If you could just raise your hand if you have a question, we'll try to get to as many as we can. Just wait until you have the microphone so that you speak clearly into it, and the folks watching online will be able to hear it too. Looks like Neil is the first question queued up across the room.
Thank you. Thank you very much for coming to UNE.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
In your research, have you uncovered any differences in the integration between the university and sports space, depending on the division, D1, D2, D3?
Oh yeah. So smaller institutions, it's significantly easier for them to integrate institutional identity, largely because the Division Ones especially, I guess now we got to call them Power Four conferences. The Power Four conferences are primarily very commercialized. There are some that still lean heavily on particular identities. It's like University of Houston, even though they're a new Power Four, their HSI identity is important. BYU, Notre Dame, these institutions still lean heavily on more than likely their religious identity. But the Division Twos, Division Threes is very easy because that institutional identity plays a huge part in their recruitment. That institutional culture plays a huge role in appealing to the masses within their community, because their fan base isn't just going to be the students. It'll be those within the immediate community. So again, I look back at the conference that my school, that my alma mater was housed in, the CIAA. It was very normal to go to a game and half the fan base there are people that live in the community. And even for some of their alumni to drive back if they live within a reasonable means. Whereas the Division Ones, like again, I've been at KU now going on 3 years, and I have yet to be able to buy a ticket to the men's basketball games. One, because students camp out and they get a bulk of the tickets. But two, it is normal and expected that you're at one of the pillars of college basketball. So the general public will go to the game just to go to the game. Whereas if I wanted to go to one of the smaller universities, like an Avila or some of these other ones, you have folks that, Avila is nestled right in the middle of a neighborhood. They do a lot of community service based in that neighborhood. And the amount of folks that come out and support them, same thing with UMKC and some of the other ones that are in the KC metro area. People will go to those games because of the role the university plays in their just overall upbringing and overall experience.
We have a student question back in this corner of the room. One of the students you got to meet earlier today, his name is Dom.
What's up, Dom?
How's it going? Thanks for coming out here. I got a quick question. What are the implications of peer pressure in a team sport, both negative and positive?
Oh, man. So peer pressure. Oh, this has probably been one of the bigger issues just in college sports in general, because there is a certain expectation that, you know, you win as a team, lose as a team, and everything in between. So the positive components is that, especially if that team really embodies all the altruistic elements, so teamwork, dedication, all of those elements, then that peer pressure, I feel like has such a negative connotation, but that's good. You get people on board with embodying the positive elements of that sport. But then again, we also see the negative components where, you know, it could be PED use, it could be improper actions, improper behaviors, or not truly embodying what that educational institution and athletic institution stands for. We've already seen the negative implications. We've seen the scandals amongst college athletes, and sometimes even the scandals with the coaches as well. So the implications, we've already seen those. But when it comes to the positive implications, I feel like that really doesn't get enough attention. But you do have certain educational and athletic institutions that are able to operate in a way to where they're respected programs, and they're not just respected for the winning outcome, but they're respected for the role that the teams play in the community, whether it's the campus community or the broader scope. So peer pressure, no matter good or bad, it does have major implications. But I do want us to start celebrating those teams where historically they've done things the right way, they've contributed to the community, they've contributed to the sport.
Looks like we have another question right here, and then I'll go across the room to Neil, and then I think I have another one back here. Michael.
Thank you very much. So I want to pick up on the cultural reproduction, and I want to think a little bit about cultural change, not just reproduction, and I want to think about cultural appropriation.
Oh yeah.
And, you know, I'm thinking about mascots, and I just want to kind of invite you to talk a little bit about, I mean, at the end you suggested that, you know, every new generation comes in and, you know, you adapt the traditions, they evolve. And so what to a group of people maybe who graduated from an institution 30 years ago, the longtime mascot, this is our identity, and then now we have a situation where we're thinking, wait, that's cultural appropriation, but that's our tradition. Yeah. Run with that, thank you.
Oh yeah, no problem. Well, you're talking to someone again who's from Ohio, so I got to finally see the Cleveland team change their identity to the Guardians. So incredibly happy with that. There's actually a lot of discourse right now regarding that unfortunate football team in Washington. But when we're looking at cultural change, that's one of the beautiful things about the educational institution in itself when it comes to this reproduction of norms, values, thoughts, and beliefs, is that, again, as we access more information, the expectation is that we adjust our perspectives and our understandings on particular topics. So if we were to look at it from like a broader scope, the SEC historically has been one of the most racially exclusive college sport conferences, where some teams didn't integrate into the late 60s, early 70s, whereas their surrounding peers integrated relatively early. Some institutions, like for example, University of Kansas, didn't actually have a major integration moment. They just kind of integrated, it just kind of happened. So you see that these different perspectives have happened throughout time, and then the norms, values that the institution either amplified or actively worked against created change. Now, when we're looking at the role of cultural change and those expectations, it largely comes from the students. That's where the power comes within the students' awareness and the students' ability to not support or to actively push back against certain mottos, certain logos, certain imagery. So there's been quite a few universities that have actively worked against that change, professional teams that have worked against that change. But the big part is the students also mobilizing within themselves and creating that internal struggle within the institution that will then, as they leave, their impact starts to become a little bit bigger because now they're components of the broader scope of society. So we've been able to see it with, again, the professional teams. Some colleges have already started to work on their rebrands. They've already implemented their rebrands to kind of step away from that. I know while I was at Texas A&M, some much needed history came out about one of our mottos, BTHO, which means beat the hell out of. Unfortunately, we had some very bad actors in our university's history using that motto in relation to racial hostility. And when we were protesting during 2020, so during COVID, George Floyd, and so many other pivotal moments within history, a lot of students actively pushed back against using that slogan. They didn't want to use BTHO because we learned that folks weren't just using it for the athletic space. They were using it as a way to incite hurt and pain against other individuals. So again, while Texas A&M has continued to use it after this component, there's a much deeper awareness surrounding that. And then there's even students that actively choose to not use that chant. And I think those are just the different components. I think when you have a highly traditioned institution, it's a lot harder to push back completely. But when you do have an institution that has been a model for change, that has embodied change, it's significantly easier to kind of see those things become integrated.
We got a question over here.
Yeah.
Hi, thanks for your talk. So I see what's really appealing about the sports culture and fan culture at these universities that have special purposes and special communities. My niece just started at Navy, and I can feel it happening already. Like the whole family's emailing about every game and every regatta and stuff. It has a different quality.
Oh yeah.
And what I'm curious about is so I went to college at North Carolina. Mm-hmm. I'm a little curious about your experience at another sort of state institution. If there's something about representing the state itself that has a little bit of that quality. But I just hated Duke so much. And I hated the kids, the fans at Duke.
Yeah.
And they were trying too hard. It all seemed fake. They didn't even want to go to Duke. They wanted to go to Harvard or Yale, and they didn't get in, and they ended up at Duke.
Oh, yeah. I love this trash talk. Keep it coming, please.
And, they really sucked.
Yeah.
And I just wonder, especially at these institutions that, they tend to be sort of elite or privileged.
Yeah.
They're a little self-satisfied. If there is an element of you can try too hard.
Yeah.
You can you create this fan culture, but it feels fake. It feels
Yeah.
performative. It doesn't feel organic. That's my hunch about Duke. I was curious what you thought.
Oh, so you're absolutely right. So first, looking at the UNC Duke situation, I think that connection between those two institutions really calls into the role of social class. So if you look historically, who went to Duke versus who went to North Carolina, you have this, religiously based institution. A lot of money goes through there, a lot of, financial support. And while North Carolina also has it, at the end of the day, they're still a state-funded institution. So there's that socioeconomic divide between the institutions. And that exists through a lot of the notable schools that are typically within the same state or within the same proximity. You typically have that, talking to some friends, that's also kind of the beef between North Carolina and South Carolina, is that North Carolina's the rich kids, South Carolina, they're like the real working class kids of the Carolinas. And, they go back and forth with that as well. And even with Texas A&M and UT's like, oh, you're the rich, progressive kids. You live in the big city, Austin, and we're the real hardworking, we're the Aggies. We get down, we get in the mud, all of that good stuff. And it's always interesting to see that dynamic, especially when you're an outsider. I was from Ohio, I went to school in North Carolina. I didn't have a single dog in a fight. Same thing when I went down to Texas. While I was a student at Texas A&M, again, I'm an Ohioan, so this beef is a lot larger, and I think a lot of it looks at proximity and historical acceptance into these particular spaces. Now, when it comes to the generic trying too hard, overly commercialized component, yes, there's many Power Four sports, many Power Four athletic departments right now where a lot of their fan culture is essentially just using whatever's considered trendy at the moment, whatever's considered popular in terms of cultivating a fan experience, and not so much creating that lasting experience or creating that thing where you want to learn a little bit more as to why you use this chant. Why is this your imagery? Why do you have this deep rivalry with this school? And it's not just because, hey, we're both good at the same time. So, I used to work in sporting goods and equipment in sporting equipment for my athletics department, and then I've worked sporting goods for a couple companies. And it's really cool to see how what used to be very normal in very regional spaces, or what became very normal for certain universities, has now become very commonplace. So I pick on everyone with the pinstripe overalls. That is very, very unique to certain Midwestern schools. And then now they just make them in colors for everyone, so I get the commercial aspect, but that's not a part of your fan base. Like, there's no reason why you're wearing pinstripe overalls, and that's never been a part of your school's tradition, but it's more so like, hey, this is trendy, this is popular, this looks good on social media, so let's go ahead and do that. I think social media has played a huge role in how certain fan cultures have kind of grown and developed over time. But there's a lot of schools that are trying too hard, and unfortunately, it's most of the schools that are on the biggest stage of college athletics. But again, that's the quintessential scene. If you had to direct a movie and your establishing shot is a college basketball game, there's a high likelihood that that college basketball scene is going to mirror the OSUs, the Tennessees, the UCLAs. It's going to mirror all of those because, again, that's what we now consider to be the standard or the norm.
Anyone else? We have a question right here.
Welcome to Maine.
Thank you.
I'm retired from UNE, and for 22 of my years here, I was the faculty athletics representative.
Yes, sir.
And I was wondering if you have looked at schools where academics and athletics are closely aligned. I think the types of schools you're talking about very likely are. Mm-hmm. But what about schools that are academics and athletics are not tightly aligned? Have you run into that?
Oh, yeah.
And can you comment on what you see in differences between those institutions?
Oh, yeah. So the biggest example, so who here has seen Bama Rush TikTok? Anybody? A couple? Yeah, so I'm going to pick on Alabama, one, because at the end of the day, I'm an Aggie, so I'm going to pick on Alabama. But if you look at the social commentary surrounding University of Alabama, a lot of folks say that they are a true party school. You're there for football, basketball, and Greek life, and everything else kind of takes a back seat. I won't say that it fully takes a back seat. They do have great academics, but the parallels between the institution, between those two institutional components really aren't there in the way that you would expect. So, there's been so many folks who have commented on, whenever Alabama plays a nationally televised game, it's typically just a general admissions video. They don't really hone in on School of Business, School of Medicine. They don't have specific commercials that cater towards those components. But then if I were to look at the University of Colorado, during Deion's time and even before Deion's time, whenever they would play a nationally televised game, there were certain academic components that were displayed within that particular space. But then if we just look at the general pop culture, again, Bama has now been known for Bama Rush and, outfit of the days and things like that. I think that plays a huge part in how people kind of understand the positioning of the institution. But there are, again, Power 4 institutions that do have a very unique identity. Like, I give a lot of credit to Vanderbilt. A lot of folks talk about Vanderbilt. There was a recent quote saying that the only thing pure in big-time college athletics is Vanderbilt, and Vanderbilt isn't that good. But Vanderbilt, all of their athletic services are funneled through the Student Affairs Office. So the academic advising, career counseling, all of those components are through an essential university office as opposed to having their own separate staff. And I actually conducted a research project where when you notice that the staff members are in isolation from their university peers, so the academic advisors in athletics, when they're not working with or collaborating with the academic advisors for the broader scope of the university, there's a lot of gaps in terms of service, and there's a lot of gaps in the overall understanding and ethic within your role. So I give a lot of credit to the institutions. So for the big schools, I give credit to the Vanderbilts who ensure that, hey, and the Stanfords that, hey, we are going to make sure that academics and athletics are equally important and equally yoked in terms of their operations. And for those that aren't, hopefully they kind of rebrand and we rework their identity, because right now that is one of the biggest struggles when it comes to schools like University of Alabama, University of Florida. It seems that the athletic component serves a social aspect and basically the framing of the university as a party school, and not really drawing that connection of that same intensity we have in athletics needs to be translated over into the academic space.
We got a question over here, Sayvon.
First off, I want to say thank you for coming out.
Thank you.
So for my sports research class, I've really focused my research on fan behavior and fan culture. And one trend I've noticed is that fans are starting to feel a distance created between them and their teams due to the commercialization of sport. their teams are starting to lose the culture and identity that drew them in.
Yeah.
And the identity of their community that was so attached to the team.
Yeah.
I'm sort of wondering, what do you think teams can do to combat this? Because obviously sports are just going to continue to grow to be more
Yeah.
commercialized.
Yeah, so thing is, they're going to continue to grow. They're going to continue to become more commercialized. Folks are going to want to spend money to be in these spaces or to attach themselves to those spaces. My biggest suggestion would be for athletics to rework their operation and start embedding themselves back within the university space. I'm not saying do a complete overhaul like Vanderbilt and have all of your athlete services funneled through the Office of Student Affairs, but there should be a stronger relationship between those spaces. One of the things, again, as a former admissions counselor, that really hurts me is that there is not an emphasis on freshman and transfer student orientations and really building that culture early on, and that's even more evident within athletics. Now with the different transfer rules and, being able to become eligible essentially like a year early, things like that, some college athletes literally finish their fall semester as a high school student and then go straight into the campus spring semester, or maybe they may wait until the summer. There's not really too much you can do when you're already knee deep into your academic space that way. So now you're bringing in athletes that aren't connected to the institution because they haven't had the same ingratiation period that the general student body has, but even universities are kind of straying away from that as well. So that's the first thing, is reworking student athlete services through student affairs, but then also reiterating and restructuring how you operate and position yourselves to the community and to the student population. So I place a lot of emphasis on intentional community service, truly understanding what your community needs and finding ways to serve them in that way, which is why I give credit to my alma mater and a lot of the other smaller institutions, especially those that service first generation and low SES communities. They typically provide very accessible opportunities to have the sport experience. And a lot of times, once you have the sport experience in your own campus, you get to now experience that campus environment, that campus space. So just restructuring on both ends, the way that you bring athletes into your campus. I think the more passionate you have athletes about being at that institution, it shows through the team. You have people that want to be there. And then the same way that your athletics department is communicated and put in position to the broader community. That they're not just here for athletics, they're there for service. They're there to be an essential component to the university. Like my alma mater, every student club and organization had community service requirements, not only to the campus, but to the broader scope. Same thing with athletics. Athletics had community service requirements for each athletic team. And we were very intentional with who we served and how we served. And there's a reason why our tailgates, we have more people from the general public going to our tailgates than we do actual students. Like, students will show up, but you'll have Mr. Bill, who lives 15 minutes down the road, coming in with his smoker and his truck and his speakers and having a good time every home game that we have. So I think that plays a huge part.
We have two individuals with questions on this side of the room, and then I think I'll invite people who have questions beyond that to stick around after our formal presentation to chat informally with Sayvon.
Great presentation.
Thank you.
I'm just curious as to your thoughts on distinction between those schools, as you've done your research, that have greater alignment between women's sports and men's sports than those who might not?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm actually working on this is in very early stages, but I'm actually looking at the role of historically women's colleges and universities. It's like Texas Women's Universities, Mount Holyoke, Spelman College, looking at the role of being a women's college and university in the way that they operate within their athletics. But there's also some schools that historically, I've noticed that the trend of universities that historically supported their women as students and as faculty and staff members also have a parallel with how they support their women's athletic programs. So I look at my time at Texas A&M. Our women's basketball team is perennially one of the best, but the overall support of the team is not where I think it should be, and a lot of individuals feel the same way. We can actually add that to a couple other women's programs, whereas if you were to look at like a University of Kansas, our women's basketball team has slowly ticked up in performance, and the support has consistently gotten up, but also same thing with our softball teams. Our softball team has performed incredibly well, and then the level of support increases year after year after year. And I mean, our softball team, they do a great job. Every game I go to, there's local softball teams within maybe 45 minutes that are at the games front two rows, having a wonderful time. And I think that's something that the team puts a concerted effort in. So I'm looking forward to seeing how the women's colleges, how they kind of position themselves. I think Texas Women's University might be the only co-ed institution that still holds true to being a women's college. They don't have any male athletics at the university, so all their athletics are still women's athletics, even though they're a co-ed institution. So by default, these athletic programs are going to be supported, but I think that's a very intentional decision that they made, even though they have the ability to to offer co-ed athletics. So I'm excited to see what I'll learn from schools like Texas Women's and Spelman and Mount Holyoke and a couple others.
And our final question.
Hi. So over the last 10 years, we've really seen some sweeping changes in the NCAA in terms of sport policy. And I'm just kind of curious, how do you see or how have you seen some of those major policy changes like sport betting or NIL impact sport cultures on campus?
Oh, man. It's so weird to hear students talking about their parlays. I'll be honest, it's really weird. I teach a content creation class, and this is now my second academic semester teaching it. And in a class of 125, there's at least 10 that each semester that they specifically cater their social media that they're going to curate around sports betting. So that's already the first thing. I also believe that creates a lot of hostility. We've seen this hostility already exist with fans and pro athletes. I think that's an even messier and more dangerous situation when you take into account these students are on the same campus as those that are betting, that those are performing. I've been lucky enough to build very good relationships with quite a few of our athletes at KU and a few other institutions. And that's one question I try to ask, hey, are you good? Are you paying attention to the fans? Anything like that? And many of them just kind of stop the ability to be tagged on social media because of things are being said. They block their name on social media when things are being tweeted out, things of that nature. So from a mental health perspective, I'm not happy specifically with sports betting. When it comes to things like the transfer portal and NIL, I think NIL does create a little bit of an issue where some folks think that, you're just chasing the money or all of those things. And that's a conversation for a different day. I've been able to see current college students have brand deals and things like that, and they're not an athlete, and no one says anything about them. I was actually at Texas A&M with a student who does fishing content, had a truck sponsored by Ford, a lot of other things, free meals at some very, very nice restaurants. And again, no one said a word, but he was one of the biggest fishing content creators at that time. And then also there was a set of twins that went to Baylor for free, that they received a lot of benefits from making Christian lifestyle content. And again, no questions, no qualms. So, for me, NIL, transfer portal, NIL, not too much. I'm not really worried about that. But when it comes to the transfer portal, when there is an easier pathway to leave an institution, it makes it a lot easier to be at your current institution, not really build too much of a connection, not really delve too much into the culture and into the identity. Not saying that they should take away the transfer portal, but more so understanding that is going to be an essential component that is lost, where you may have some athletes who have the opportunity to now transfer back to their hometown team. I believe KU, we have a basketball player who's from Lawrence, played elsewhere, and then now he's back at KU. So I would be very surprised if he was not knee-deep in the KU culture. But if we were to take some of the other athletes, first year, second year, it's very easy for you to be somewhere for 1 to 2 years, not really buy into it too much, and then be able to leave and then go somewhere else and kind of have that same process. So that's my biggest concern, is that there's going to be a lack of connection to the institution, and that is very visible everywhere else. There's just a certain culture, a certain expectation you have when you do share that connection.
Thank you all so much for joining us for our inaugural event here in Biddeford, and thank you so much to Sayvon JL Foster for a wonderful, informative talk.